Welcome back to my channel. This is PC Amateur Guy. I wanted to take this time to talk a little bit about the Trump tariffs that are basically hitting China, Canada, Mexico, and other affected countries. It's not really good for a trade war right now, and for tariffs, but essentially that's what may ultimately happen. I mean, in Canada, there's a 30-day, and in Mexico, there's also a 30-day hold because Canada and Mexico has agreed to do some border control. Mexico decided to send 10,000 troops to the border to keep the Mexico and U.S. border controlled. Canada has decided to pay like 1.3 billion to start a project to make sure that that border is tight so that fentanyl is not coming through. But ultimately, if there's going to be tariffs, how is that going to affect the consumer? How is that going to affect PC parts, right? How is that going to affect computer parts? So I wanted to talk about that, and I'm going to dive right into it. Essentially, you can see I have power supply out here, some fans here, some cables here, essentially keyboard products, cases, even PlayStation, electronics. So essentially what's going to happen is whenever there's a trade war, essentially if there's a 25% tariff, it just means if we're exporting, if Canada is exporting, or Mexico is exporting, or China is exporting, final goods, essentially 25% is going to be put onto, the higher prices. It's going to, because the cost of sending it over is going to be more expensive now, right? So let me just take an example. Like, let's say this fan here, the cost is, so let's say $10. Let's just pretend for a minute this fan is $10. So essentially, if there's going to be a 25% tax, this fan is probably going to cost now, $12.50, or essentially they're only going to profit $7.50 because you have to take away the basically the $2.50. So usually what happens for PC parts with 25% export taxes, it's going to be the consumer that's going to be losing out, right? Because now, obviously the manufacturer is not going to pay for it. They don't want to lose the money. So this is going to cost 25% more. So instead of paying $10, you're going to be paying about $12.50, maybe $13 a fan. And that's also going to affect, graphics cards as well. You're going to see, because everything is right now is in US currency, and a lot of these NVIDIA chips, the main chip that creates the graphics cards is coming from the US. So, if you're going to export that out, a lot of the countries are like Canada is going to say, well, you're going to have to, if you want to send stuff to us, we're going to, charge you 25% as well. So essentially what's going to happen is the consumer is going to probably most likely, like my guess, is it's going to hit the cost. The cost is actually going to go to the consumer because now this graphics card, let's pretend this, 2080 Ti when it first came, let's pretend it's $1,000 US. Now it's going to cost, $1,250. So essentially you're going to see that the parts are actually going to get more expensive, even cases, right? This case, let's say it was cost $100. Now you're going to see it's going to be $130 because what a lot of these manufacturers are going to do is basically say, you know what, I'm not going to incur the cost. I'm not going to pay for that, export tax of 25%. Essentially, I'm just going to hide it inside the cost of the case. So you're going to see, like PlayStation, for example, will increase in costs. Essentially, the parts to make it will also be expensive, right? So everything, in my opinion, what's going to happen is a lot. If you notice now, if you check a lot of the prices on commodities, on PC accessories that you're thinking of buying, you're probably going to see that hidden 25% cost already, because a lot of these manufacturers already, or retailers are actually saying, I'm not paying for that cost, right? So essentially, what's going to happen usually in a trade war, or if there's going to be tariffs, it's going to be passed on to the consumer, is my opinion. If you disagree, put your comments below and tell me what you think, what's going to happen. And essentially, so hopefully there's no no tariffs are going to be impacted in anywhere of the countries, Canada, US, China. But if we see this happening, if it's going to be ultimately applied, it's going to hurt the consumer at the end of the day. And that's also going to hurt, basically, it's going to hurt the economy, right? It's going to hurt inflation. Inflation in the US and in Canada is already high. So essentially, when you put a tariff on exports and stuff and imports, it's just going to be, essentially everyone's going to pay this additional 25%, right? And essentially, you're going to see that that's going to affect inflation. The prices is going to go higher, and a lot of monetary policy. Banks don't the Bank of Canada. They don't know what to do, right? They don't really know what to do because essentially they want to increase interest rates to reduce people from buying, right? But then at the same time, we're actually going to be going into a recession. So do they decrease the interest rate? So this is kind of unprecedented during a recession, and throwing in tariffs. It's just like two opposite poles that are pulling each other, right and left, right? And how who's gonna win? We really don't know what's gonna happen. So a lot of people are just gonna wait and see what happens. But what I'm saying in summary is that if there's gonna be a 25% tariffs applied to Canada for exports, Canada's probably gonna do the same for US to export goods to Canada. And just remember that there's lots of pieces and parts that, for automobile, for example, they need from Canada. And we have some minerals and stuff, natural resources that US doesn't have at home. So essentially they need those parts to produce, the parts. So it's gonna reduce supply. And then usually when, economics 101, when supply is down, it's gonna increase prices, right? So this is definitely not good. And we're gonna have to wait and see how this unfolds. But essentially, my opinion is that if there's going to be a 25% tariff, and there's going to be a trade war with Canada, US, Mexico, and any other countries like China, etc., you're going to see that hidden cost is going to be basically applied to the consumer. So the consumer is going to get hit with this hidden cost on top of already inflation that's already, going to, already high prices on like groceries and all that. So that's just going to be higher. So it's obviously going to reduce demand because when prices are high, people are going to buy less and they're going to find alternatives to buy within the Canada, for example, or if you're in Mexico, you're going to try to buy within the US. And I believe that Trump is applying these tariffs because he wants, the US to come up with other alternatives, right? He wants to have the 100% of the automobile built in the USA and don't want to rely on anyone. And a lot of times, like the companies will have to find alternatives, but sometimes they don't have that part or they don't have that natural resource and they won't be able to do that. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, but definitely not good for the consumer. Thanks for watching.